Imagine being led to the gallows, the noose around your neck, and hearing the lever click, not once, not twice, but three times, and yet you're still alive. This is the heart of a story that defies all logic, a tale that takes us to Victorian England in 1885, where a man, John Lee, should have met his death, but somehow he mocked fate. Get ready to delve into one of the most incredible and macabre episodes in English criminal history, a mystery that has left entire generations speechless and which still today has not found a definitive explanation. Something inexplicable, almost a miracle, or perhaps an extraordinary failure, saved his life that cold morning. The story begins in a picturesque corner of Devon in Babbacombe, where once stood the sumptuous home of Mrs. Emma Keyes, a respectable, wealthy, perhaps a little eccentric woman who availed herself of the services of a small household. Among them, a young man named John Lee stood out. His life, up until that point, had been that of an ordinary boy, with a few minor misadventures behind him, but nothing that foreshadowed the horror that was about to descend upon his existence. It was the night of November 15th, 1884, when the tranquillity of Babbacombe was shattered by a blood-curdling scream. Mrs. Keyes was found dead in her bedroom, her body torn apart by horrific wounds, her skull crushed. The scene was horrifying, a veritable bloodbath. The investigation immediately focused on the immediate family circle, and John Lee, the young servant, became the prime suspect. The evidence against him was a tangle of clues, seemingly overwhelming, but all circumstantial in nature. There was no murder weapon found with his fingerprints, nor a confession extracted. Yet the fact that he was the only man in the house, his sometimes contradictory statements, and the discovery of some blood-stained clothing, which Lee insisted was the result of an accidental cut, were enough to build an accusatory castle. The trial was quick, and public opinion was already divided. The jury, probably influenced by the violence of the crime and by social pressure, had no doubts. John Lee was found guilty of murder, and as the law of the time required, the most severe punishment was imposed, death by hanging. The judge's gavel fell like a final seal on his fate, sealing a verdict that in another era might have been questioned due to the lack of direct and irrefutable evidence. But 1885 was a different time, where justice sometimes appeared blind not only in its symbol but in its application. On February 23rd, 1885, the sky above Exeter was leaden, almost as if to mirror the gloomy and somber atmosphere that enveloped the local prison. That day, John Lee, by then known as the man they couldn't hang, was due to ascend the gallows. The echo of his death sentence had reached every corner of the United Kingdom, and a crowd of onlookers had gathered outside the prison walls, awaiting that macabre spectacle which was, for many, a form of popular entertainment, but for a few others, a moment of reflection on the fragility of life. Inside the walls, the tension was palpable. The gallows had been meticulously prepared. It was a simple but lethal structure, a platform with a trapdoor, a dangling noose, and a lever. The official executioner, James Barry, was an experienced man, a professional in his craft, accustomed to handling such dramatic moments with the utmost efficiency, and it is said, a certain professionalism. He was no novice, but a man who had already seen death descend many times. John Lee was led to the scaffold, a short journey that must have seemed endless to him. His face, probably pale and lined with fear, did not betray total resignation. A few days earlier, he had cut his hair to give to his mother, a gesture of farewell and love, perhaps a spark of hope, or an attempt to leave behind a last piece of himself. He was wearing his condemned man's garb, and every step toward the gallows echoed in the oppressive silence of the small room. The witnesses, including the prison director, the chaplain, and several journalists, watched in deathly silence, ready to witness the inevitable. The noose was placed around his neck with the typical precision that characterized the executioner's work. Barry, having arranged every detail, stepped back, his hand on the lever, ready to perform the final act. It was a well-rehearsed ritual, a procedure that left no room for error, an execution that should have lasted only moments. But what happened next? No one, not even the most experienced executioner, could have predicted. Executioner James Barry, with his experience and cold determination, pulled the lever. It was a decisive gesture, a move he had made dozens of times. But this time something went wrong. The trap door, which should have opened with a loud bang and sent John Lee plummeting into the void, remained inexplicably and stubbornly closed. An even deeper, more incredulous silence fell over the room, broken only by the perhaps imaginary ticking of a clock. Their eyes met, filled with bewilderment. Barry, initially surprised, thought it was a minor jam. He was a practical man. Perhaps the lever hadn't been pulled hard enough or at the right angle. With renewed determination, he pulled again. The same result. The trapdoor didn't budge an inch. The tension in the room was now palpable, a wave of shock and disbelief rippling through everyone present. John Lee, who had already faced the prospect of death once, was now facing it for the second time, in a gruesome and prolonged way. The executioner, visibly irritated and embarrassed, did not give up. His reputation, his professionalism was at stake. For the third time, with the utmost energy and precision, he grabbed the lever and pulled it. Once again, the macabre ritual was repeated without its tragic epilogue. The trapdoor was sealed, motionless, mocking. Those present were stunned, incredulous. What had happened? Was it a mechanical failure, a defect, or was there something more, something inexplicable, almost supernatural, in that stubborn refusal to open? The prison director, in confusion, ordered an inspection of the mechanism. Barry himself bent down, trying to figure out what was wrong. They checked the hinges, the structure. Nothing seemed out of place. For a moment they thought the trapdoor might have swollen from the humidity. They even tried lubricating it with grease, hoping to unblock it. Again they pulled the lever, and again the trapdoor refused to cooperate. It almost seemed as if he had a will of his own, as if he refused to fulfill his task. John Lee, standing there, the noose around his neck, had crossed the line between life and death 3 times, and he was still there, his heart beating, his life hanging by an invisible thread. It was a chilling, surreal sight, one that none of those present would ever forget. Faced with such an inexplicable failure, the authorities had no choice but to stay the execution. They could not continue to pull the lever indefinitely, transforming an act of justice into a cruel and sadistic farce. John Lee was returned to his cell, shaken but incredibly alive. This extraordinary event immediately sparked a thorough investigation. The trapdoor was meticulously examined, dismantled, and reassembled, tested in every possible way. And here came the biggest twist. In John Lee's absence on the gallows, the trapdoor worked perfectly. It opened and closed smoothly, snapping shut at the slightest touch of the lever as if nothing had ever happened. It seemed like a twist of fate, a mechanism that refused to function only when that particular man's life was at stake. News of John Lee's miracle spread like wildfire throughout England and beyond. The press covered it extensively, and people speculated. Some attributed it to divine intervention, a sign that his innocence had been recognized by a higher power. Others spoke of incredible bad luck for the executioner, or a mechanical failure so peculiar it defied rational explanation. What was certain was that the event had created a wave of sympathy and enormous public pressure. A man could no longer be executed after such a prodigy. Queen Victoria herself was informed of the incident, and after careful consideration and the intervention of the Home Secretary, the decision was made. John Lee was granted a royal pardon. His death sentence was commuted to life imprisonment. He was not free, but his life had been spared in a way so unexpected and extraordinary that it remained etched in the collective memory. John Lee spent 22 years in prison before finally being released in 1907. His life after prison remains somewhat shrouded in mystery. It is known that he changed his name, attempting to escape his fame and the burden of his past. He died at a late age, it is said in the 1830s or 1840s, perhaps in America, or perhaps more likely in a workhouse in Devon, taking with him the secret of that cold morning in Exeter. The case of John Lee, the man the gallows couldn't kill, remains one of the most fascinating and disturbing enigmas in the history of justice. Even today, more than a century later, there is no single, universally accepted explanation for what happened on February 23, 1885. Theories abound. The most plausible hypothesis, though still speculative, is that of an extremely rare and unfortunate mechanical failure. Perhaps a small splinter of wood or a piece of metal had become lodged in the trapdoor mechanism just at that precise moment under John Lee's weight, preventing it from opening. Some have suggested that the trapdoor was poorly designed or installed with a small flaw, which manifested itself only under specific stress conditions, such as the weight and position of the condemned man. Others have speculated that the ground beneath the gallows may have been slightly uneven, causing a twist that jammed the mechanism. Some have even speculated on sabotage, perhaps by someone who believed in Lee's innocence. But this theory has never been substantiated and seems more like a romantic idea than a real possibility. And then, of course, there's the miracle theory, the theory of divine intervention. For the most religious, the impossibility of carrying out the sentence was an unmistakable sign from heaven, a manifestation of a higher justice that had recognized John Lee's innocence, or at the very least granted him a second chance. Whatever the truth behind that unexplained mystery, John Lee's story has become a legend, a tale that continues to fascinate and inspire. It symbolizes the randomness of fate, the unpredictability of events that can change the course of a life in the blink of an eye. But even more profoundly, it is a symbol of life's extraordinary ability to escape even the most certain death, to resist, to cling with a strength that sometimes seems to transcend all logical explanation. It is the story of a man who somehow escaped his tormentor, leaving us an enigma that will continue to intrigue us forever. If this incredible story has captivated you, don't forget to click on the next video to discover more unexpected mysteries from the past.